Hey everyone! Thanks for joining us for the next session of our Spotlight on GitHub Copilot series, Harnessing Insights, Maximizing Success with GitHub Copilot Data and Tools. My name is Anna. I'm an event planner for Reactor, joining you from Redmond, Washington. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our presenter to answer. Our session is being recorded. It'll be available to view on demand within 24 to 48 hours right here on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. With that, I'd love to bring in our presenter. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me. I suppose I should start with a brief introduction before moving into the agenda properly. My name is David O'Patrony. I am the product manager for Copilot Data and Metrics. And my goal here today is to share some information about what we're building, where we're going, and how you can take advantage of these tools to get the most out of Copilot and supporting you in your goals. So with that, there's a brief agenda. So coming up, we're going to talk through the principles that guide the types of data tools that we make available, why we choose to build what we choose. We're going to talk about what functionality exists today and where we've come from over the last several months together, and then where we're going next. Then I'm going to talk at a high level about the tools that are available out in the world today to help you make use of the data or to get started if you're looking for something to put some wind in your wings. And last, I'm going to talk about some of the scenarios that we're trying to unlock for customers of Copilot in order to be more successful. So with that, I'll move straight on to our design principles. Where there's 4 of these together. And the first is that any metric that we provide, we strongly believe needs to be outcome oriented. So to us, this means giving you insights into adoption, how your onboarding programs are going, using metrics like the last activity dates. Furthermore, highlighting engagement among users is something that's very important to us. Because these are areas where we can identify hotspots within Copilot usage, either from those who are extremely enthusiastic and routinely getting daily value, or those who may be in need of additional enablement or may not be aware of features that are available to them. We need this data to be actionable. So any data that we supply is meant to be a call to action where we provide an opinionated metric. The next one is that it needs to be interoperable. So what you'll see over time is that the data that you can get from our core productivity APIs, things like pull requests and commits, is something that we want to converge with the data that's available on the Copilot metrics APIs. And last of all, we are a programmatic first shop. Our features are AI led. That said, we are investing in GitHub native visualization solutions to certain of these metrics. So over time, you can expect to see parity across each of the individual surfaces. And I want to talk a little bit about what we're building now and why with those design requirements in mind. The first is that where GitHub provides a prepackaged metric, these are meant to be leading indicators that support your success, the things that without driving successful outcomes in, the ultimate return or the productivity gains with Copilot won't be realized. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those specific metrics are in the future. We're also aiming to provide data, disaggregated data, for lagging indicators. So from our point of view, lagging indicators are things like developer happiness, productivity, ROI. The reason for this separation is because the ability for GitHub to be confidently opinionated on your organization's goals and the specific gains you're trying to make suffers from the fact that we don't have access to the data you have. There's a boundary between us at times, whether that's because you're using a different source control system, or whether it's because you're on a different CI/CD pipeline. So many of those gaps that appear would be crucial to us being able to bring you that strong opinionation. So in order to fill that gap and fill that role, our product philosophy is that if we can't give you the metric, we'd rather give you the data to empower you then to integrate that into a way that makes sense for your organization. So a little bit now about roadmap. Today, you have access to the Copilot Metrics API. The Copilot Metrics API is intended to spotlight usage among teams. At GitHub, we are strongly opinionated that software is a team sport, and usage is the best indicator of derived value over time. We, in our day-to-day lives, rarely use tools that don't provide us with capabilities that help us succeed or be better. And the same is true with Copilot. So leading with the idea that usage is the best evidence of derived value, you can monitor this endpoint over time in order to track which teams are consuming the most or which may need additional support. We also offer the user management API. This is, on the one hand, a tool for managing seats, Copilot licenses, in other words. However, it can also be used in order to evaluate onboarding. It has one field today and one coming in the future, which I'll talk a little bit about, which allows you to see at a granular level the frequency of individual users' usage of Copilot at large. And this is a very powerful tool for finding instances where you've had installation-based blockages, or perhaps there's been a snag in the login step. So you can take direct access using that field. Coming up, we have extremely exciting things taking place. First of all, you're going to continue to see investment in the metrics API itself. So I'm going to talk more about what that involves, but engagement metrics are coming. And we are also bringing investment in two big projects. One we refer to as data snapshots, and the other is our GitHub native dashboard. Data snapshots is our solution for giving you the data in cases where we can't build the metric. And our GitHub native dashboard is meant to represent not just the metrics that are on the metrics API, but the calls to action associated with them in order to drive the type of success that you want to see through adoption and sustained engagement over time, particularly in cases where perhaps your organization doesn't have direct access to analytical resources. And so making use of our API is maybe higher friction than it should be. We are strongly of the perspective of meeting customers of Copilot where they are with our data tools. And each of these represents a different way to consume different types of perspectives with differing degrees of technicality. So I'm really, really excited about these. The preview phase of both of these projects is anticipated in Q3 or Q4 of this year. This is, as always, subject to change and represents a conservative estimate. We're always looking for ways to ship more value faster. So you can expect to see change logs on this coming up soon. We're really excited for it. So the metrics API has been in production for some time now, and we do have plans to continue expanding it. So even though we have these two new projects on the horizon, we don't intend to let the metrics API fall by the wayside. We've heard from many customers that this is an extremely useful tool in order to demonstrate value over time. So over the past roughly coming up on a year, it's hard to believe, we've gone from having no metric surface whatsoever in this regard to now having visibility into IDE chat. Code completions was the original launch in the alpha back in last year. And now we have IDE chat, .com chat and .com, small typo, as well as pull requests. So that is what is out in the world today. In the future, we want to bring nested team structures to the metrics API. Today, you can access data at the enterprise level, the organization level, and the team level. We want to make nested teams available in the future. That way you have much greater flexibility to represent org charts or team structures that we don't have internal concepts of in GitHub. So that's going to be, I think, a big value add here. We also know that things like authentication, extension usage, custom model usage, and champions are all very important to you. And I'll talk a little bit more about champions at the end, what that concept means and how we're going to bring you data to support that. So again, here is the kind of high-level view and packaged in a different format of where we think we're going. And the next stop on our roadmap is user-level feature engagement metrics on the metrics API. This is going to introduce a user-level view of whether or not a given user on a given day leveraged a Copilot surface. And so what you'll find is that for each Copilot feature that we have in that release iteration, a true or false statement as to whether that feature was used. And this is a very, very powerful way of understanding where there are gaps in driving sustained engagement with the full breadth and depth of Copilot features over time. We find that the companies that most radically gain from Copilot and find the largest improvements to their engineering systems tend to also be those who have demonstrated the ability to drive that type of sustained engagement. So we want to create visibility into that. And this is how we intend to do it. So very excited that that's coming up in Q2. That will be our initial alpha phase. Like the other parts of the metrics API, we do intend to expand that over time. Copilot is growing rapidly, and so we will have an associated roadmap with that. And then again, looking forward to the end of the calendar year, we expect to have in preview the GitHub native Copilot dashboard and, of course, data snapshots. So now, taking a brief segue, I want to talk at a high level about sort of what's out there today. There are links that are publicly available and that you can find these. So the first is that GitHub Docs actually includes scripts that you can run to pull from the metrics API and save the data. So if that's been a pain point for you, or you're looking for a walkthrough and how to retrieve that data and store it locally, we've provided a script there. We also have a large community of open source integrators working in Node, and to my knowledge, the latest one was in Flask, for building web apps that consume and visualize Copilot data. So there, in addition to the GitHub sponsored documentation, we also have the open source stuff. We also offer, through the Microsoft application marketplace, a Power BI template, which is fantastic because it integrates directly to the usage metrics API, as well as to the user management API, and comes stock standard with a collection of metrics that you can use out of the box. So you can connect directly to it, and you'll be up and ready to go then and there with all of the metrics that the metrics API is capable of rendering for you. And it also stores the data locally. So you have the long-term retention built in. And of course, the Copilot journey from adoption to engagement to sustained value over time is one with a lot of different steps, and it takes place over weeks and months. And we have our learning pathways on github.com that detail each of the individual metrics that we think are very important to that story. And I encourage anyone interested to check that out. So having talked a little bit about now what the roadmap is, tools for getting started, this is I guess, the phase of the discussion where I talk a little bit about how to use this data and how we see these things integrating with one another. So on the user management seats endpoint, you have the last activity at field, and we hope to soon introduce the last authenticated field. These allow you to automate dormancy actions. So if you are conducting a large rollout, of course, it's very painful to try to go into the UI and manage your licenses. So you can use the information on this field to do it for you. Last activity at covers all Copilot surfaces, and it updates very quickly throughout the day. From our perspective, the best way to pull this would be at the end of the day because the most recent value is always present. So you will always see whether or not somebody was active during that day, and you won't have to necessarily be calling the endpoint over and over and over again. Likewise, last authenticated is going to be added granularity that will allow you to better identify whether the dormancy that you might see is related to an installation step and a login step, or whether it's more connected to someone who has installed the tool or perhaps struggled to onboard to it. So moving on then, this is the point where we would recommend some form of check-in or some form of automation, as we pointed out before looking into adoption. And this is where the usage metrics on the metrics API really shines in this sort of step of the journey, both through team and org metrics. Again, we see value through usage. And then coming up, this is where we'd see engagement. And so this is where we'll find things like Copilot champions, those who consistently day upon day are using the full breadth and depth of the features that they have available to them. Here is an example. So as you can see, this is kind of an idealized scenario over time of how taking direct access using these two fields can allow you to close the gap between your total onboarded licenses and those that are in regular daily activity. And moving on to one more example, this I think is super exciting from my perspective because this is where using this user level metrics API endpoint on the metrics API will allow you to cultivate communities of success. We've seen in our data, and this is just mock data, but you can use the data here to build views of the total consumption of Copilot over a given period of time, or you can really drill into who are the individuals who are my regular power users of a given feature. The interesting things that we find in this data is that there are any number of cases where a individual who uses Copilot chat 7 days a week never uses code completions and vice versa. And so there's clearly stories to unpack from this and to understand like why certain usage behaviors are the way they are. Again, this is coming in the next quarter, and we're really excited about that. We think there's going to be a lot of positive change. And of course, the entire purpose here is to build a community around success. These power users within your organizations are in possession of best practices, whether that's for prompting or whether that's for the particular languages they're trying to use, or the particular Copilot feature that they use to tackle a certain problem space. And we're really excited to put this in your hands. It is limited to EMU only, and that is because of our commitment to data privacy. EMU accounts are the accounts where we can be confident that we are not inappropriately cross-pollinating different organizations' data. So out of an abundance of concern, it does have that limitation. However, we're still very excited to offer that. So this has been the high-level overview. There was a lot of information to share. I know that went fairly quickly, but I wanted to go through a Q&A because I think that's probably where we'll get into a lot more detail and people's specific concerns and questions. Just reading through here. So far, no questions. So in anticipation, I guess, of anyone having anything in particular to dig into, we do run into a number of very common questions in our customer conversations. One of them is why we do not offer individual usage metrics for users of Copilot. This is one of the more common questions that we get. The answer is that we avoid putting measures like lines of code accepted, code survival rate, lines of code pushed, number of chat acceptances, these types of things onto any sort of um, data surface directly because we are very conscious of a number of concerns. The first is that by establishing that as GitHub and pushing this as an indicator of health and success, we're sending a message that software development is quota based or volume based, when in fact it's not. And more to that end, as soon as any utility is exhausted in this from an onboarding perspective, it will become a toxic benchmark. And we've seen similar types of benchmarks in similar scenarios historically take things in the wrong direction. And so the last thing we want to do is to inject any type of adversarial standard into your engineering system. And we think that if we were to take the path of putting individual user metrics onto the metrics API, that it would achieve exactly that. So instead, what we like to focus on is the sustained engagement over time, because we know that in most software development environments, individuals are spending their time writing code 3 days out of 5 per week. And that's because the nature of software development simply includes much more than writing code. And so if you're finding that your engagement levels are typically hovering at around that rate, that is a very normal, healthy rate. And we think that this is actually a much better, more powerful, more actionable indicator than something like lines of code, which could be very easily gamed or could bring bad dynamics into team relationships. Another question that we routinely get is why GitHub does not have a ROI metric or a productivity metric. There's good reasons for this. The first among those reasons is that we do not possess the quantity of data necessary and the types of data necessary to draw that inference about changes to your engineering system. Nor do we have the certainty that you have of your goals. Many organizations wish to achieve different things with Copilot. Sometimes that means developers having more time to work through unit tests. Sometimes that means accelerating the velocity of certain tasks. Sometimes that simply means that developers are going to be writing higher quality code. And so in each of these scenarios, we lack the data and the certainty to wade into that discussion. It is true that in our marketing, there are strong, well-backed claims as to the impact that Copilot can have. And what differentiates our ability to say that versus the production setting is, of course, in a research environment or in a controlled study done with a partner in consulting, there's simply more methods to gather accurate data according to those changes. So that is why we have so far abstained from making any sort of concrete statement metrics-wise as to what the ROI or productivity measurement schema should be. However, coming up in the future, when we produce data snapshots, this, we believe, is going to unlock a world of potential, not simply in filling in gaps that might exist in your engineering system, but for that matter, giving you insights that will allow you to optimize your configuration for Copilot. So for instance, today, we don't have a clear tool for giving you insight into which model and which feature might be best for what use case and what language. However, using this data, you can identify the users who are taking advantage of the strongest Copilot configurations for a particular task at hand. So this has the effect, of course, of raising the ceiling of value that Copilot can deliver for you. I'll take a break while I check to see. Thomas Williams says, David, appreciate the work being done here. Does Copilot have a partial list of leading and lagging indicators? Did I miss that on the slide? This is a great question. So some of this is described on the slide, but I think it definitely bears talking about. The most important leading indicators. In fact, I might even just take us, excuse me, back to the slide. See if I can pick the right one. Here it is. Okay. So these are what we believe to be like the power indicators for driving future success. This is backed up both by our research that we've conducted internally as well as with consultants, and it's backed up by what we see out in practice with our customers. And the first critical step is always to solve for onboarding. You get no other value if people aren't using the product. So it sounds self-evident, but it may not necessarily be self-evident that there's a tool to help you do it. And that's where the user management seats endpoint is extremely powerful in helping you solve for friction in your onboarding process, to automate your dormancy actions, whether that's a friendly email that says, hey, do you need support, or whether that is license cycling or some other activity. This is where you can optimize in that step. And of course, the success in the onboarding phase is the precursor to success in the adoption phase. And this is where the team level usage metrics, where you see sustained engagement over time, is an essential precursor, of course, to netting value. We are not opinionated that you need to see 1,000 lines of code or that a 50% acceptance rate is better than a 20% acceptance rate, because the way that we interact with LLMs and the way that we derive value from LLMs is inherently at times ambiguous. It could be that many chats are a great indicator, or it could be that very few chats are, in fact, a great indicator because you get value so quickly. It could be that you have a low acceptance rate, but you've cycled through a number of poor options that have accelerated your time to the solution. And so, again, what's important to see here is activity and usage and trends over time, but there's not necessarily a guarantee that one poll on either side of the spectrum is inherently better. And for that reason, then, the third and most important category of leading indicator of success is this engagement with Copilot and the functionality that surrounds it. Copilot is quickly becoming a highly customizable platform for integrators and folks working on models. And for that reason, we want to expose to you that cases where teams and individuals are taking advantage of the full breadth of features. We think that is, and we see that being very, very powerful when it comes to netting the full potential impact of Copilot. So hopefully, Thomas, that answers your question. The documentation that's up on the APIs will have greater detail as to how and when these metrics are composed and what sorts of things are included in them. Evgeny says, is there some sort of metric to see how successful chat is for developers, or any sort of context shortage for a project? There's two questions in here. I think this is a really good question. Speaking in terms of what's available today, the metrics that you have are applied to chat in github.com if you're using that functionality, and they apply to chat in the IDE. And in the IDE, we are able to show you how many chats are how many code blocks are being copied or inserted from chats into your code base. So you can take that as a type of proxy for how successful chat is being. And as we increase the number of modes that chat takes over time, we'll of course seek to make that data available to you. But that in and of itself, like I said previously, can be ambiguous, because someone may paste that code into a file that Copilot that isn't part of the repo that you're working in. They may stash it somewhere for later use, and it may not have direct impact. Or it even may be heavily edited. So there's a lot of variables at play when it comes to the actual real life usage of the product. Looking forward, however, one of the features that we are really excited to make available for the Data Snapshots program is access to the user-facing contents of prompts and suggestions. What this gives you the power to do is probably more than just the 2 or 3 examples I'll give, but the ones that the problem spaces that we're really excited to solve for here are that users who are prompting in a particularly successful way is something that we think is very important to grant access to. The right to audit. So if you are in a highly regulated space, if you're a financial company, for example, the right to audit the contents of the code that's flowing to your system is, of course, something we absolutely want to unblock for you. And last of all, in cases where code survival analysis is of great interest, this can be a huge benefit. And so you can combine those 3 use cases with the metadata that's coming back. And so you can say, okay, I want to understand how my users are prompting in chat. I want to see that code survival rate go up. And I really want to know what model they're using for C# and why there's these outlier users that are so much better. That's the thing that we can't productize for you simply or quickly, but it's the thing that we can give you the data to do. And we think that the data is your property after all. And so that to us is the way we want to unlock that for you, Kenny. Hopefully that answers your question. Parth says, based on the documentation for the metrics API, there are quite a few dependencies on the user to have the right setup for telemetry, which may vary from IDE to IDD. Excuse me, IDE to IDE. Are there any ways to streamline this? The short answer, unfortunately, is that Visual Studio Code is, well, I guess I shouldn't say unfortunately, but it's unfortunate that I have to say no to you. There is not an overriding admin control. Visual Studio is open source. It is a Microsoft product. The decision that was made was to delegate that decision-making to the user and to allow it to be discussed between the user and a potential employer. That's not something that GitHub has access to. And I think there are, it's certainly worth considering, but I regret that I can't give you a simple answer to this question. So yes, usage metrics are reliant on client telemetry. However, on the user management API, your authentication signals and your activity signals are durable to telemetry disablement. So that's really important to consider when you're thinking about dormancy, because those endpoints, even if you have gaps in your usage metrics, those endpoints will be stable. Furthermore, with the advent of the user level engagement metrics on the metrics API, which is that feature level usage report, we do intend to introduce a telemetry disablement inference. The way we would infer that on a given day is if we see a sizable gap between your client telemetry for a user and your server telemetry for a user. So to the extent that measuring success is important to you, this is a tool that we want to put at your disposal that can help you spark those conversations. So hopefully that enables you in the future. Next question, sorry, Parth goes on to say, an example of this is active document, which is available as a flag in Visual Studio, but I guess that was not for Visual Studio Code IntelliJ. Also, language determination based on active document might not always be accurate. Yes, I think something that is important to bear in mind with the usage metrics API is that we try our best to have a stable, human usable collection of language mappings. However, we are reliant on the editor and the network to get us that data. And so, and that also applies to the language. So there are times when you may see some gaps appear, whether that's due to an editor or whether that's in the way the editor communicates the language. This is a thing that we've incrementally improved over time, and we're going to continue to focus on. We have lines to these teams. I think one of our emerging success stories here is with Xcode, which initially provided us with virtually no data whatsoever, and we've improved that reliability since then. So it is as ever one of incremental progress, but it's just good to be aware of. The Near says, will we be able to view the data at the team level? Currently, tracking onboarding at the organization level is challenging, especially when managing a large number of users. The answer to this, excuse me, varies slightly depending on your Copilot deployment. So if you are on a Copilot business SKU for non-GitHub Enterprise, sort of colloquially referred to as standalone, you may hear it referred to that way. The metrics that are available to you are through the enterprise team, because that is the only vehicle that exists in that configuration for assigning a license. So if that's your configuration, you will be limited in that regard. However, we do today make team metrics available in cases where you are using a GitHub org to build teams and assign licenses. So that ought to be available today. Team metrics, it's important to bear in mind, behave in a certain way in order for us to achieve the outcomes that we desire for it. So a couple, three, I guess, important takeaways for how team metrics behave is that the contents, the day of data is evaluated at the end of the day. And that when we run that evaluation at the end of the day, we also check to see that that team has 5 or more members of it. This is a common practice in Microsoft and in GitHub. The rule of 5 is meant to prevent people from being singled out unnecessary in ways that are hostile, and it retains focus on software being a team sport. And if you have a team which has dipped below 5 members for that day, you won't see metrics for the team for that day. And my third comment about this is that there is no similar activity requirement. So if there are 5 members on a team and they're all inactive, you'll still get metrics for that team. They'll just be zeros. So hopefully that helps clarify a little bit more about team metrics. The next question, thank you, Thomas, very kind. So says, what specific hard metrics, Bala says, what specific hard metrics and qualitative anecdotes would you recommend we track internally that are not included in GitHub's built-in dashboards? Please ignore door space. Please be specific. I'll do my best. The qualitative feedback that has been very powerful has been developers' sense of the time they save on given tasks throughout a day. The reason for this is that the complexity of determining complexity is great. If you ask me to tell you how complex a Word document is, well, I certainly couldn't use its length or how long it took to write, and I couldn't even use its vocabulary. These would all, be maybe directionally meaningful, taken as a constellation of metrics, but not in and of themselves highly indicative one way or the other. And the same problem extends in a much more significant way to coding tasks. It's not something that we're in a position to make bold statements about, and so outside of a research environment. And so in those cases, having developers who we trust to use tools that bring them value and whose expertise we trust, having those developers self-report can be a very powerful way of beginning to build that ROI picture for yourself. And our value engineering organization is of exactly the same mind. This is the same consultation that we give to developers. So you don't have to lean into Dora or to Space. If you're looking for a place to start, I would start there, because one of the things that gives you the ability to do is to think about the ways that perhaps you might want to modify the responsibilities that developers have. Maybe you want them to be more end-to-end. If they are saving considerable time, but perhaps there's process blockages in the way. This is, in one case, we saw that developers were reporting tons of time saved, but folks in management couldn't figure out why they weren't seeing changes in the engineering behavior. And it turns out, well, we forgot to increase the number of story points per sprint. So this gives you a way of kind of orienting yourself as you go on that journey of sort of like, process and cultural change that comes from AI tools like Copilot. Um, Natalie says, we have started using GitHub Copilot at work, and leadership wants to know the ROI. What's the best metrics to look at that show that having it provides value to developers and hence to the business? I think I'll recap a little of some of the contents of some of the former answers, but in my opinion, ROI is something that you can watch for inflection in if you already have engineering metrics. Um, if you're using Azure DevOps or anything similar, you have access to data sets that will allow you to correlate your business impact to your engineering investments. And to the extent that you're conducting a Copilot rollout and you now have tools to see who is the most active and which teams have adopted most wholly, you can trace changes in the output from those teams into the engineering system. It's a very complex answer. There's no one number. And this is something that I think is a difficult part of the story to tell, is that netting Copilot, call it impact for lack of a better word, is something that takes many weeks and sometimes months to see. And sometimes it takes finding bottlenecks to understand if there's something preventing that time savings from flowing back into the system. And it also requires evaluating your goals. Your goals may not be to deliver faster. You may want to write better test coverage, or you may be looking to bring down the number of dependency issues that you have in your repos. These are all very worthy goals and very good use cases for Copilot, but they don't necessarily all strike to the same meaning of value. And so I think having a very clear goal is, of course, the first step. Finding qualitative responses for your time savings would be a second excellent step. Ensuring that you have strong outcomes in your leading indicators, I think would constitute the third step. And then taking advantage of any engineering metrics you're already using and then evaluating those in a controlled way is the fourth step. I think taken together, that would put you in a good position to make claims and to back up the value that you see Copilot delivering day to day. Hopefully that helps. Let me know if there's any clarification. Parth says, thanks for the clarification. Having the means to determine telemetry disabled gaps would be helpful. Yeah, we really like this is once again, this is a matter of design principles. Call to action, highly actionable, provides insights, but doesn't necessarily do anything on your behalf. Gives you the power to do the follow-up. So we're really excited for this. We know how important having consistent metrics are to you, and we hope this improves that. I feel like we've kind of covered like all of the big highlights at this point. But if there are more questions, I'm happy to continue chatting through this. There's always more to say about data. Oh, this is a great question, Nir. Thank you. Is there an automated way to label issues, pull requests, or commits that were primarily generated by Copilot? From the user experience side, from the UI perspective, I am not acquainted with any tool that would allow you to do that. I think this is a problem space that we're trying to solve for, and the problem itself comes down to one of the realities of the Copilot deployment, which is that Copilot itself does not necessarily know that the code you're working on is going into a particular repo. And it doesn't maintain the ability from your IDE to watch that code go up in a pull request. After all, you might be on a different source code management system. So, there's a number of sort of real world deployment factors that get in between us and tracing the destination of code and how that goes upstream. That said, given that there are in Copilot features inside of GitHub, inside of those workflows, this is an area where we want to bring visibility. Uh, it is on our roadmap. We don't have an estimate that we can give you, but in our backlog is the ability to tag data on the core productivity API as being as having interacted with Copilot. So that would apply to things like pull requests and specifically. That is a TBD sort of feature, however. There is though, and I will add this, on the metrics API, of course, you do get the number of pull request summarizations that are being done. So while it's not precisely what I know you'd like, that is the kind of stopgap in the meantime. And of course, with data snapshots going forward, that's part of the client telemetry story. So when we reach a point where that part of the Copilot surface area is within our snapshots program, you will have access to see the events of the particular pull requests that are being, supported by Copilot, for lack of a better term. Hopefully that answers your question. Thomas says, will the Copilot dashboard include any ability to combine data from other developer tools, or will be populated only by Copilot data? This is a very, very good question. At this point in time, we do not have plans to offer a surface that would allow you to blend and ship non-Copilot data sets into GitHub. This is an area, though, that is developing. There are, I guess I could call it, there are points of view that even the ability to upload pre-baked metrics, engineering metrics, in side by side with other Copilot metrics could be quite valuable. So I'm not in a position to say we've ruled that out entirely, but we're not at a point where we're fully confident about putting that on our roadmap. Of course, fallback solution to this is for us to ship you these large data sets and go from there. However, it's a really great question. I think it's something we're listening very closely to. So if that would be very valuable for you to have those side by side in GitHub visualizations, that's something we want to hear more about. Alan says, will the features that are available inside of GitHub for Copilot be available within Azure DevOps? I am sorry, Alan. I cannot give you a strong answer. I am not privy enough with the DevOps roadmap to be able to weigh in on that. But thank you for the question. If the extent of my knowledge here really does pertain to the kind of in GitHub side of the equation. Need to take more questions if they're out there. Given that there's only 10 minutes left, unless I see any new questions come in, I will do just a brief recap of the major points that we've covered so far. Starting with just design principles behind data. Again, we're trying to bring you outcome-oriented, actionable data sets that you can interweave both with other sources of Copilot data, with your own engineering systems. And we want that to be a programmatic first experience, though we are definitely going to be investing in the dashboard front. Our main focus, excuse me, is by bringing you metrics for leading indicators of success. These are the things that if you don't have success there, you will not see the returns that you're hoping to see from Copilot. These fall into the three major buckets of onboarding, adoption, and engagement over time. And if you succeed there, you're very, very likely to find improvements in your engineering system overall. Coming up, we have data snapshots and our Copilot native dashboard for showing you those adoption, usage, and engagement metrics inside of GitHub. We're super excited for this. This is going to really raise the ceiling on the amount of value that Copilot can deliver, because it gives you tools to optimize how you customize its usage and how individual insights into how individuals who are very, very successful with Copilot are having that success. Again, all centered around the idea of building communities of excellence within your engineering org and socializing best practices. On our roadmap for the metrics API, again, we've most recently introduced .com chat and pull requests into our metrics offering. We're really excited to be expanding this in the future and bringing you things like nested team metrics, individual engagement metrics and championship, as well as metrics on extension usage and models. This is our timeline coming up. We have our first stop in Q2 is going to be for user level feature engagement metrics. And then toward the end of the year is when you'll see the previews for the dashboard and snapshots. Again, you can visit GitHub in our documentation. There are a number of resources available for accessing data, storing data. The Microsoft Power BI app marketplace has a GitHub built Power BI template built with love by a volunteer team that wants to get tools out into the world to help you pull data. And this will snap straight to the endpoints and allow you to visualize data right out of the box. And of course, on our learning pathways on github.com, we have a trove of information that gets into the details about what to expect along the adoption journey and the pitfalls that you might find. So I really encourage you to spend some time there with that content if that's of interest to you. Again, here, these are our leading indicators focusing on onboarding, adoption, engagement. These are the areas to apply the most scrutiny when you're earliest in the Copilot journey. And again, here's an example of how you can use the user management API in order to use the last activity field to measure adoption daily over time, allowing you to take action and bring down dormancy or address any friction in your onboarding process. And this is a preview, of course, of our user level feature engagement metrics that will allow you to build up a sense of power usage within your community. So with that, oh, it looks like there have been a couple more questions. Oh, is there a link for today's presentation? I will have to defer to the organizers as to how you can find any follow-up links where you could rewatch. as I understand it, Reactor is also hosted on YouTube, so you may have link there. As I believe that will be available within 24 hours. And right here. Will the raw data you mentioned be aggregated at the user level, or can we expect highly granular data, such as the actual prompt data, to allow for further analysis? This is a great question. So the data that you will receive is going to be client-side event-level telemetry from the usage of Copilot, and that will include user identifiers, again, for EMU customers, because this is a strong privacy concern that we have. Um, and in time, our current roadmap does incorporate the prompts and suggestions as the user sees them. So you will be able to conduct analysis, for example, on which prompts could be driving the best code survival rates for specific languages in specific use cases over time. And if you combine that with the core productivity data and the repo data that you have available to you, now you can begin to build up a very powerful tool chain for driving success and federating best practices that you discover over time. Particularly as these tools evolve, those patterns and practices will change. And so by shipping you this data set, you will indeed have the ability to conduct very, very deep analysis, and you will have the ability to map that analysis back to your org chart in a way that we can't do for you. So I'm very excited to hear the stories that come from this once it's available. Neil says, thank you for answering all my questions. Looking forward to the new updates. You're welcome. I'm happy to be here. And thank you, Nir, as well as everyone else in the room for your questions. Paula says, thank you so much. You're welcome, Paula. Happy to have been able to clarify on some of our direction and data topics today. This has been fun. One last note, of course, on GitHub communities, if you have questions there is a metrics category where you can post those. So if you're watching this and you find you have questions that come up later and you'd like to reach out to the team, the communities pages are the place to do that. So it looks like we're just in the last 30 seconds. Thank you, everybody who has been here. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat. Um, Hopefully, we can have more events like this in the future. But until then, like I say, if you'd like to reach us, you can find us on GitHub Communities. We will be posting change logs, and our public roadmap will be updating. So you can count on seeing a lot of data-related activity in the future. It's very exciting.
Thank you all for joining. Thanks to our speaker. Our session is a part of a series. To register for future shows, watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen or in the chat. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we'd love to hear what you have to say. You can also find that link on the screen or in the chat. Today's event code is 24753, and we will see you at the next one.